They wouldn't let me talk to my classmates. The TV was considered the devil's window. I didn't know what Halloween or birthdays were, but that wasn't even the worst part. The worst part was that I believed them. I was born in a small town in Oklahoma where most streets had no sidewalks and neighbors greeted each other through the windows of pickup trucks. My childhood didn't smell like cookies or laughter from the TV. It smelled like sweat, fear, and more sweat. My parents were members of a small religious community they called the Chosen Ones. Our house was old, the paint was peeling off the doors, and every rug was a rusty witness to countless prayers. We didn't have a TV. There was only one phone, a landline, and it was locked. I wasn't allowed to answer the phone. And I certainly wasn't allowed to have friends outside the community. My name was Grace, and I always thought that God gave me that name. My mother always said, "You are Grace that came down to this earth. Remember, Grace, my father and I fasted and prayed for 40 days for God to give us you." And I believed it. I believed everything, because otherwise it would be punishment. We had a penance room, a small room under the stairs, windowless, with a Bible and a list of psalms that had to be read aloud. I was 6 when I first went there. I was talking to a girl named Bree at school. She showed me a colored hair tie and said, "If you pull it like this, it shoots." I laughed. The teacher didn't say anything, but one of the pastor's sons, Joshua, was sitting behind me, and he told me everything. That evening, they took me to the penance room. My mother held my hand, but not as a mother, as a warden. There were no tears in her eyes. "You have given the devil a place to live, Grace. We must cleanse you." I sat on the cold floor and repeated Psalm 51 over and over again. "Purge me with hyssop, and I shall be clean." I remembered those words better than I remembered my own name. I sat in the darkness of that room and heard something whispering in my mind. Maybe it was fear. Maybe it was my own voice. It asked, "Are you sure this is love?" But I didn't answer. I was forbidden to talk to myself. It was called inner unclean dialogue. That night, I was not allowed to eat dinner. It was part of the punishment. After prayer, I was to lie on the floor with the Bible under my head instead of a pillow. In the morning, Dad opened the door and silently waved. I knew what that gesture meant: to leave silently, to wash myself, to ask no questions. My mother was already waiting for me with a white scarf. She silently tied it on my head, a sign that I had repented. At school, I was again made to sit apart from the other children. This was not an ordinary school. It was financed by our religious community. The teachers were just as fanatical as my parents. They did not teach us evolution. They did not talk about the world outside. They only quoted the scriptures, read to us from old books, and punished us for any pride. Once I drew a rainbow, and I was punished. The rainbow was a symbol of the proud, and therefore unclean. The only joy was books, and even those strictly limited. Only what the pastor approved. Stories about martyrs, biblical stories, the lives of holy women. But I read between the lines. I saw a spark, real life, somewhere out there, beyond these walls. Sometimes I woke up at night when the house was dark and quiet. I would sneak up to the window, press my forehead to the cold glass, and watch the lights flicker on the road. Once I saw a couple, a man and a woman walking down the sidewalk laughing. She held his arm, he was saying something to her. Her laughter, although I couldn't hear it, seemed free to me. And I thought, I want that too. We had 6 prayers every day. The first one was at 5 in the morning. I hated it, but I couldn't say it out loud. Once when I was late, Dad grabbed my hand and whispered through his teeth, "It's the devil who makes you lazy. If you give him space, he will get into your soul." He had this look, not cruel, no. On the contrary, too calm. It was even scarier, like a wolf that is sure of its prey. On weekends, we went to meetings. They lasted 4 to 5 hours. Pastor Jacob was a big man with a deep voice and eyes that seemed to see right through you. He shouted words from the pulpit, and we fell to our knees, beat our chests, and cried, "You are not children of this world. You are the chosen ones. The enemy is watching, and only purity of spirit will save you." I saw Mom and Dad crying. How my mother hugged women, how my father kissed the ground in front of the pulpit. And I believed that it was true. Because if it wasn't, then it was all for nothing. And so I was for nothing. Sometimes, on the darkest nights, I didn't pray to God. I prayed to myself in the future. "Be strong," I whispered. "Be wise. Get out. I believe in you." But then it was morning again. Again the headscarf. Again humility. And again silence, like skin on the body that can't be removed. And then Ellie appeared. She was new. Her parents had just joined the community. They had come from Arizona. Ellie was different. She laughed. For real. Even here. She wasn't afraid to ask. One day in class, she asked the teacher, "Why does God punish children for the mistakes of adults?" And then I froze. Everyone froze. But she wasn't afraid. She held the teacher's gaze until he lowered his eyes. For the first time, I saw fear change direction. And I thought, maybe I'm not alone. I didn't know yet that Ellie would change everything. That her appearance would be like the first ray of light in a dark well. That she would make me see the truth. And that the truth would destroy my home and save me at the same time. Ellie came into my life like a storm entering a quiet valley, without asking permission, with gusts of wind and the smell of a distant thunderstorm. She was bright as lightning, and just as dangerous. For someone, perhaps even life-saving. For me, definitely. I remember our first real dialogue. Not a formal greeting, not a pious, "Peace be upon you," but something alive. It happened after the meeting, in the courtyard behind the temple. She came up to me with an apple. This was already a violation. Eating fruit on fasting days was considered frivolous. "Do you want it?" she said, and held out the fruit. I looked at her, then at the apple, and everything flashed through my mind. The story of Eve, about sin, about the forbidden. But at the same time, I saw her smile, warm, stubborn. "Is this a test?" I whispered. "No." She smiled even wider. "It's an apple. And you definitely lack vitamin C." I couldn't stand it and laughed. It was a quiet, unexpected sound. Perhaps the first real laugh in my entire childhood. And from that moment on, I knew. There was something between Ellie and me. Something that would grow, even if all this concrete pressed down on top. We began to talk secretly. In the school toilet, while cleaning the classroom, on the road after assemblies. She asked questions that no one else was allowed to ask. Why aren't we allowed to talk to people behind the fence? Why does God have to be so mean to punish children? Why do you have to be afraid of your father if he loves you? I didn't know the answers. And it was a new feeling not to know, because I had been taught that all the answers were already there. Just open the right chapter, the right verse, and everything would be clear. But with Ellie, nothing was clear. And that was the most magical thing. One day she brought me a notebook. Simple, lined. Inside were poems. Heron about the sky that has no restrictions. About rivers that don't force you to go in one direction. About a girl who ran away from her iron house. I read them at night, under the covers, with a candle in a jar, like in movies I had never seen. This notebook became my Bible. I read it every night. And for the first time, I wasn't afraid of my thoughts. They were mine. Everything hung in the balance. Every word we exchanged was a risk. Once we almost got caught. I left a note for Ellie in the Bible under my desk. It was a short poem, a response to hers. But someone, I still don't know who, told the teacher that I was writing something off topic. I was called to see the pastor. His office was dark. The walls were wooden, the windows were narrow, with blinds that never opened. He was sitting at a massive desk, my note in front of him. "What is this?" he asked, not looking at me. "These are just words. Not holy words. Not from scripture. This is rebellion, Grace. Doubt is poison. And you're already swallowing it." I didn't answer. He stared at me for a long time. Then he slowly stood up, walked over, and put his hand on my shoulder. His voice became soft, fatherly. "We all want you to be saved, but you have to decide who you serve. The light or the shadow, God or your heart, for the human heart is deceitful." I nodded. I always nodded. But something in me was no longer obeying, no longer afraid. It was choosing. That night, I went to Ellie's. She lived in a trailer on the edge of the community. I knocked softly on her window. She opened it immediately. Her eyes were surprised, but not scared. "What happened?" I don't know what's going to happen next," I said. "But I know I don't want to live like this." She nodded. "Then we'll find a way out." That was the beginning of a conspiracy. A small, naive, dangerous conspiracy. Two girls against a wall of dogma, against fear, against the past. We started planning. We studied the security at the gate. We knew when the delivery truck was coming. We found out where Ellie kept her father's old phone. with a SIM card that no one had activated. And while everything seemed possible, even freedom, a word we never said out loud, became closer. But no revolution goes unchallenged. Someone overheard us. And the punishment came sooner than we thought. We thought we had tricked the system. Two birds learning to fly between the branches, in the dark, out of sight. We thought we could escape. But cults are not just religions. This is fear that has learned to speak in the voice of love. Dad was the first to feel it. His gaze began to change. It had never been warm, but it had become hard, like an ice castle waiting to be cracked. In the evenings, he would sit silently beside me, not reading, not praying, just watching, as if trying to read the truth from my face. "You've changed, Grace," he said one evening. "What happened to our humble daughter?" I swallowed. "I just think more. As you said, thinking is the way to purification." He nodded, but he didn't believe it, and he said nothing more. There was a threat in his silence. I felt it on my skin. The next day, Ellie didn't come to school. I asked the teacher, "Where is Ellie?" He didn't even look up. Sinners don't study with the pure. I felt an electric shock. Something had happened. Something terrible. I sat through the rest of the lessons in a fog. Then I ran to her family's trailer. The windows were closed. The curtains were drawn as if they were dead. I knocked. Once, twice. Her father opened the door, a gloomy, silent man, always with the pastor. "She can't talk to you," he said. "The Lord has revealed the truth to me. You are the source of her downfall." I tried to look inside. Is she alive? What have you done to her?" He pushed the door in front of me. I was left alone. My hands were shaking. The words, "the source of her downfall," "sinner," "punishment" echoed in my head. I felt like a traitor. I wanted to help her, but instead I put her under attack. That night, Dad made me pray on my knees for 3 hours. He sat silently next to me. Once an hour, he would stop me, ask, "What are you thinking about, Grace?" I would say, "About salvation." He would nod, but his eyes would grow darker. On the third night, I couldn't stand it anymore. I woke myself up in the middle of the night. I got up. I took my shoes and went outside. I knew where the hiding place was. Ellie had once shown me. There was a crack in the back wall of the temple between the panels. There lay her notebook and an old phone. I found it. I didn't know who to call. I just entered the number that was first on the list. I didn't hear a call, only beeps. Then a woman's voice. "Hey, who is it?" I was confused. My name is Grace. I need help." "Grace?" Her voice changed. "Where are you calling from? Did Ellie send you?" Do you know Ellie?" "I'm her aunt. They took her from me a year ago. They said she was in a boarding school. I didn't know she was still there." I swallowed hard. "She's here, but something has been done to her. She's gone. She's being punished. I'm afraid that..." The woman fell silent. Then, "Where are you?" "Give me the address. I'll call the police. I'll come myself." I gave her the address I knew by heart. Route 117, 5 miles south, Camp Light of the East. She said, "Hold on. I'll be right there." I got home before dawn. I left my phone in my sock, hidden behind a board in the floor. That night I didn't sleep. And I didn't pray. I just waited. And in the morning, everything exploded. Sirens are blaring, screams, cars, police, voices over the loudspeaker. The pastor shouts, "The enemy has come. Don't let them in." Women fall to their knees. Men hold hands. Panic. And I am in the middle of it, like an island. I was one of the first to be found. Ellie's aunt, with the police. I stood on the porch in a scarf, my voice broken. She ran up to me. "Where is she?" I asked. I took her to the house where Ellie lived. The police burst in. A few minutes later, they carried her out, pale, beaten, but alive. Her eyes met mine, and she smiled. They put me in the car. I was shaking, but I felt that something was finally over. They were taking me out. I looked around, and for the first time, I saw our community from the outside. Sloping roofs, barbed wire fences, window faces. This whole world was breaking. I didn't know what would happen next, but I knew one thing. I survived. I was placed in a center for traumatized children in the suburbs. Everything was clean, bright, humane, but unnatural, like plastic. The walls were blue. The doors didn't lock from the inside. And every other voice here spoke like a soft teddy bear, slowly, carefully, without corners. The psychologist, Mrs. West, had a gentle face and large glasses that fell slightly on her nose. Her voice was like tea with milk, warm but weak. She asked me how I was feeling. I answered as I was taught, "Blessed by the will of the Lord." She nodded, wrote in her notebook, and then said, "You don't have to say the right things, Grace. Just yours." But I didn't know what yours were. Everything that was mine had disappeared the night I was pulled from that world. Ellie was in another center because she was older. We could only see each other in the presence of the guardians. Her face was different, not tearful, not broken, but silently hard. Her eyes were sharp, like shards of glass. "They broke me," she said in one of her first meetings. But they didn't break me. I wanted to believe that this was about me too. But I was cracking. And I didn't know if it was destruction or restoration. I was strange at the new school. I wore the clothes they gave me. I didn't know any TV series. I didn't have a phone. I didn't know how to use a computer. I spoke quietly. I didn't look people in the eye. And most importantly, I didn't trust anyone. Because trust is what the sect fed us in order to control us. One day, I was called to see the school psychologist. I sat across from her, hands on my knees, my back straight. "You refuse to work in groups," she said. "Do you have a hard time with your peers?" I thought. "I have a hard time with everyone." "Do you believe that people can be good?" "I believe that people can pretend to be good until you become weak." She was silent. Then she wrote something in a notebook. They sent me to therapy. And there I said out loud for the first time, "I'm angry." "At whom?" asked Mrs. West. "At everyone. At my father, at my mother, at God. On Ellie." "Why on Ellie?" "Because she made me free. And now, I don't know who I am. And that's scary." That evening, I cried for a long time. Not quietly, not inwardly, but loudly. And for the first time, I felt that crying was not weakness, but movement. If it weren't for that, I would never have started writing. I opened my notebook and started writing words. About windows that suddenly became transparent. About rage that is like life. About freedom is not escape, but acceptance that you will never get your old self back. And then something unexpected happened. I was invited to an open meeting for teenagers who had survived religious control. It was a circle where everyone talked. The boy next to me told how he was forced to whip himself. The girl across from me, that she was called possessed, because she laughed when she wasn't allowed to. And suddenly, I realized I was not alone. Their stories are mirrors. Ellie came to the second such meeting. She read poetry. There was iron in her voice. Everyone was silent. And then, standing applause. I stood up too. And for the first time since the escape, I smiled for real. We walked together after the event. She took my hand. "I'm sorry," she said. "For what?" "For not protecting you. I should have." "We survived," I interrupted. "That's enough." But at night I wrote in my notebook, "This is not enough. I want to not just live. I want to live for myself." I stood on the roof of the center where I had lived for 8 months. The sky was dawn, like wet paper, with the first touch of sunlight. I hugged myself and thought, my name is not Grace. Because the name you were called in a cage cannot remain yours when you are learning to fly. It was my 18th birthday, and the first one I had ever really celebrated. Mrs. West had given me a simple leather-bound journal. Inside, on the first page, was a single sentence written in her own hand. "Freedom does not mean not being afraid. It means moving in spite of fear." I read those words over and over again. They struck a deeper chord than any sermon. Not because they were loud, but because they were honest. I started college in a support program. Social workers helped me get my paperwork in order. I lived in a dorm with 3 girls who knew nothing about my past world. I didn't tell them, not because I was ashamed, but because I didn't want to be the one who grew up in a cult anymore. I was the one who was passionate about philosophy, who cried to Florence plus the machine, who learned to laugh out loud, who told a professor for the first time, "I don't agree with this," and didn't hear a sentence for it. And still there were nights, such as these, when I had dreams. The pastor pulls my hand. My father says, "You betrayed the faith." My mother is silent, only crying. I woke up with a clenched fist and thought, what if they were right? And then I took a pen and wrote, "Faith is a choice, not a sentence. Love is support, not a chain. God, if he exists, is not the one who punishes when you ask." One day I received a letter, an old one with a yellowed edge, from my mother. I held it in my hands for almost an hour before I opened it. Her handwriting was a little shaky. My Grace, I know I have no right to ask you, but I pray every day that you will forgive us. I didn't know how else to raise you. I believe you are safe, and I thank God that you are alive. If you ever want to, write, I love you, even if it is a sin. I read the letter 10 times, and I cried. But not out of pain anymore, but out of understanding. I didn't write to her right away. I let myself wait. Because forgiveness is also a choice, not an obligation. That evening, I met Ellie in a small cafe on the corner. She was already working for an organization that helps young people who have escaped religious control. She looked different. Dyed hair, tattoos, determined, free. Are you still Grace? She asked, laughing. I smiled. Number I registered a new name? Taylor. In honor of Taylor McKessie, the writer whose book changed me. Ellie raised a glass of lemonade. Here's to Taylor, and to all of us, living, broken, real, and we drank, not to faith, not to obedience, but to freedom. For having lived, grown, and stopped being afraid to love ourselves. I no longer look for the truth in other people's words. I look for it in myself. And I know that the truth is not in perfect faith. It is in the right to ask questions. I tell my story because it is not only mine. Because somewhere in the world, another girl is standing under the window of a church and is afraid to run away. I want her to know, on the other side is not emptiness. On the other side is us. And we are waiting for you,